Hi, I'm Stephanie Curtis, Director of Programming for NPR News. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for In Focus. NPR News created In Focus to provide a space for our community to come together and talk about and find solutions to the inequality in our state. Today, we are going to look at the private sector and entrepreneurship for solutions and inspiration. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. I love to hear about people creating jobs and adding to the economy and making their dreams come true and making a little bit of money. I urge you to share your questions and comments about entrepreneurship and growing businesses in our state. Right now, I'll turn things over to our host, Angela Davis. Take it away, Angela.
Thank you, Steph, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Angela Davis here at NPR News, and want to remind you that if you have a question that you would like to pass along to the panelists, go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, and I will do my best to try to pass on all of your questions as we talk over the next hour. The racial reckoning sparked by George Floyd's murder in 2020 led to several of the country's largest corporations, from Apple to Target to Goldman Sachs, to pledge support to entrepreneurs who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Many corporations promised spending, investment, mentorship, and other forms of support, but a study conducted earlier this year showed that only a portion of pledges from U.S. companies had actually materialized. In Minnesota, some BIPOC-owned businesses have reported a surge followed by a subsequent decline in support. Media organizations and cultural influencers have all compiled lists of BIPOC-owned businesses to help the public more consciously be able to spend and invest their money. So what we want to know today is this: has anything really changed? Do we have a sustainable and inclusive local economy or not, or not yet? What does true allyship and support from corporations and government and consumers look like? Right now, we're going to talk with three Twin Cities business and nonprofit leaders who are at the center of efforts right now aimed at supporting BIPOC-owned small businesses. And I'd like to introduce our three guests, and I invite all three of you to go ahead and turn on your camera so we can see you as I introduce you. We have with us today Nancy Corsaw, and Nancy is the founder and CEO of Black Business Enterprises based in Minneapolis. She supports Black entrepreneurs by providing online networking groups, advice, small grants, publicity, connections to customers, and much more. She also created a directory and a magazine showcasing more than 7,000 Black-owned businesses across the country. I'm so glad you had time to join us today, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me, Angela. I am so excited, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Nice to meet you. We also have with us Alfredo Martel, and Alfredo is president and CEO of the Metropolitan Economic Development Association here in the Twin Cities, also known as MEDA. It was founded 50 years ago to support entrepreneurs of color and to provide grants and loans and business management training and to help connect businesses with contracts. During the pandemic, MEDA distributed $23 million to well over 1,000 businesses. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being with us, Alfredo.
Great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. We have so much work to do, but this is a very timely chat.
It is. Thank you. And we also have Terry Tao with us. Terry is a program director at Nexus Community Partners based in St. Paul. Nexus trains leaders and strengthens organizations and communities of colors. It is one of its goals is to build community wealth. And Terry also leads the program that trains and places people of color on publicly appointed boards and commissions. And in January, we can tell you she'll be starting a new job as a program director for the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. Thank you for joining us, Terry. Congrats on your new job.
Thank you very much, Angela. I am really excited to be here today and have this in conversation.
Well, we're going to be talking about solutions for supporting BIPOC businesses. But first, I want to start by talking about some of the challenges that each of you has seen. Nancy, I'll start with you. Tell me about some of the major challenges that are faced by people of color who are entrepreneurs here in Minnesota.
Absolutely. And thank you again for having me here today. So one of the biggest challenges, and for many of you that don't know, I actually have a network of 3.6 million members with almost 35,000 of them being business owners. Believe it or not, the biggest challenge is not even anything that's on anyone's radar right now when you think about business, but it is housing. It is so hard to
Housing.
help housing. Absolutely, Angela. It's so hard to help entrepreneurs when their basic need is not even being met. We gave a small grant to a business owner, and we didn't hear from her for a couple months, and turned out she was sleeping outside with her kids. And I think that's our next pandemic, our biggest pandemic, really, which is housing. It's very hard to rise up and help people of color, indigenous people, Black people, in any way when, again, the basic need is not being met. That's one challenge, and the other challenge is funding. And
Mhm.
that's why I came up with these small micro grants, is because we have such talented, brilliant people, but they can't even get funding to start on their idea. And one $600 grant helped one person create a $920,000 business last year. So that tells you the power of making funding available to all equally.
So when you look at many of these entrepreneurs, these are folks, many of whom, have families. And so they are passionate about getting this business launched, but at the same time, they're trying to, to get their basic needs met. And so again, housing, I'm just still stunned that is, something that you hear about a lot among the folks you're talking to.
Absolutely. Minneapolis is a great city. However, if you drive downtown right now, or even right outside of downtown, there's homeless camps, as many of you know. On 1200 Second Street, there's, I think I saw a family of 12. I saw, in all colors, really just sitting out there, and it's freezing cold. Now, some of these people, believe it or not, are entrepreneurs. They take little things and make it into a business because they want to survive. And it doesn't matter that there's millions of jobs open. They're not necessarily hiring that person. So it
Mhm.
is very disheartening to see just the basic need not being met. There there are so many companies, as you said, making pledges, and one of them is, supporting these individuals. But it's just not hitting the right place. No one can succeed if they don't have the very first thing, which is a roof over their head.
Mhm. Terry, the pandemic we know has been devastating for many small businesses, not just the BIPOC owned businesses, but we do know that BIPOC owners were especially hard hit. A stat that has stuck out to me the last few months, we know that nationally, 40% of Black owned businesses closed their doors in the first few months of the pandemic. And that's according to a study that was done by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And so they were twice as likely to close as businesses overall nationally. And Terry, let me ask you this, what are some of the reasons that BIPOC businesses are so vulnerable in your experience?
In my experience, it's a number of factors, right? It's first of all, we have to acknowledge history and the wealth gap and the sad statistic of 227 years it will take for a lot of Black families to catch up to white wealth. So there's that. But I will say overall too, like when we look at in addition to the historical context, oftentimes businesses of color are extremely under-resourced, right? They are not given SBA loans, for example. Alfredo probably knows much more details about this. I'm just giving the high level
Mhm.
information. They're under-resourced. In addition to that, they're probably, so that means they have to take out, alternative sources of financial capital to help support their businesses, borrow from friends and family. And so when they are, and then in terms of who their customer base is, not really understanding sometimes their customer base. So it means they, when the pandemic dried up, if their customers were also BIPOC people who also lost a lot of
Mhm.
jobs during the pandemic, then their businesses dried up too. So you saw the chain effect, chain reaction impacting BIPOC-owned businesses.
It's just a
And
domino effect. Mhm.
Yes.
I would
And
love to add to that, Angela,
yes. Mhm.
because I actually lived this. And as you know, I support all these businesses in the Twin Cities, and they literally had to give up. If I can give you a small example, these Black-owned nail salons, I know over half of them had to shut down. Barbershops, they just could not, of course, they were not fully organized to prepare, and who could be prepared for a pandemic.
Okay.
But to Terry's point, a lot of them had to take high interest loans
Mhm.
because they could not get approved for the SBA facts. So now if you're having to pay a $600 a month loan, of course you're going to shut down because you just cannot afford, no longer afford it. And now your customer base dried up, and also marketing. They really lack the resources to be able to
Mhm.
market their business in an efficient way. So we lived it. We saw over 3,000 of our BBE members close their doors, and these were very viable businesses. So now what we're doing is training them so that they can withstand another pandemic or another emergency, but it's still lacking that funding and those resources to be able to prepare their businesses for that. It's almost like a domino effect where they can
Mm.
never get out of the mud.
Alfredo, you've been very patiently waiting there and listening.
Mhm.
What can you add to this conversation about the challenges we're seeing faced by small business owners who are
Mhm.
people of color?
Yeah, I would. Everything that's been mentioned is on record and well documented. I think that, to Terry's point, the fragility of BIPOC entrepreneurs in their financial realities, and the fact that their personal finances were often intertwined with their business finances. When
Mhm.
we had the shutdown, a lot of that retail space, a lot of the sectors where BIPOC entrepreneurs operate, was literally forced to close. Therefore, no revenue. You have very limited cash on hand, and your personal finances are intertwined with your business operation. That is basically a perfect storm for
Mhm.
a disaster in terms of BIPOC small business ecosystem. On top of that, we as a CDFI, as a community development financial institution, when the pandemic occurred, and even the well-intended stimulus responses came, such as the PPP loan, as we've all heard so many of them, we ourselves, our institution was illiquid. We had all of our resources or all of our capital already deployed in service of our clients. So we didn't have any more, let's quote, any more money to lend out. So when PPP loans came around, we couldn't actually participate and help our clients on the first round. The first round, as you all know, is also documented, went to corporations, white-owned businesses, big businesses that could claim, hey, we're Hilton Hotels and our hotel is shut down. We need $27 million. Well, our clients got lost in that shuffle. So by the second round and the third round, we were able to come back with strategies to get liquidity and participate and start to help our clients. I would say that in the bigger picture, as we're talking about events in March, June of last year and where we are today, we've always known that this was not going to be a sprint. At MEDA, we always knew this was going to be a marathon. So we've adopted a strategy which basically has 3 R's, which is respond, recover, and retool. And we've done a lot of responding in the last 18 months. And that's, I think, what you see when you see those reports of, well, there's a lot of commitments, there's a lot of activity, everybody's responding. Now,
Mhm.
Delta variant has arrived, Omicron is here. And so this recovery phase is a little bit of a, no pun intended, because it's foggy out there today, but it's a little bit of a fog right now. And then we're looking forward to a concerted recovery phase so that then we can step into the future, growing more BIPOC-owned businesses. That's what we call retooling into a new economy. So these 3 phases are at play. We're probably exiting, the respond phase, and we have this sort of mixed bag in the recovery phase. What we get excited about, what we're optimistic about, is that we see activity towards the deployment of not short-term lived solutions, but more longitudinal, long-term commitments.
Let's look at some more statistics. We know that in the months following the murder of George Floyd, there was an outpouring of support for Black-owned businesses. And Yelp, one of the search engines or Yelp website, they saw a 12,000% increase in searches for Black-owned businesses in June of 2020. So again, corporations from Apple to major, banks pledged support back then. Alfredo, so did we see that early support here in the Twin Cities?
We were blessed with the fact that we had a lot of corporate attention on our operation and a lot of support, particularly when we were talking about the response phase. I'll give you some internal metrics that will give you a sense of how we've been supported internally. Our loan capacity has more than doubled in the last 2 years. So we entered 2020 with a loan portfolio of about $20 million, $21 million. We're currently at 65. And it's going out the door as fast as we can get it. So in terms of the operation of a community development financial institution, our capacity for service, our capacity for providing capital has more than doubled. So that's a good thing. So we feel that that's a positive. In terms of access to market and corporations paying more attention to providing BIPOC entrepreneurs access to their contracts, I would want to highlight a Target Corporation, which here in town has done a really remarkable job of paying a lot more attention on their procurement practices and how they can start to award contracts to BIPOC entrepreneurs. Like, for example, Rick Harris and the furniture company that's redoing their headquarters is a Black-owned business from our Ascend Twin Cities program. They're also looking at procurement in printing, procurement in recruitment. So there are organizations that are leading the way in this, not a moment, but a long-term movement effort.
Nancy, what can you tell us about what you saw in terms of that early surge of support across Minnesota?
Oh, Angela, I actually have a metric. I have it in black and white, and I have so much to say about this. But if I can give you an example, when George Floyd first happened, we had over 175 companies that pledged support to us, and that all lasted about 3 months. When they over 70% of them quit or just disappeared, did a disappearing act. But I just like Alfredo, I would like to highlight, Comcast Media Bridge, who is every day going above and beyond, making sure that they are in the trenches and not really taking allyship, which again, is a bit of a dirty word to me, but really taking that action to heart. Robert Half, Gillette Children's Hospital, Timberwolves, the W Hotels calls on a weekly basis to see what other people of color contractors that they can use for anything related to the hotel. And that is what I call real support, something that lasts, because this is not going to change overnight.
No.
The injustices that we share. So this is a lifetime commitment. And I think the president of MediaBridge said in her own words, it is going to take forever to undo what's been done. So I have to commit every single day to making things right. And when I tell you every week, they reach out and say, how can we support your community? But when we have other companies, and it's another thing to support businesses that are in the news when it's popular and it's the hot thing to do. And it's another thing to really go to that tiny business that is struggling and truly needs that support. But because they don't have any press or news on them, no one is assisting them. So it's a very very controversial topic for me because I've seen it with my own eyes.
So Nancy, getting back to the you said about 3 months later, about 75% of the support disappeared.
Yes.
Meaning no contact, like not responding to emails or phone. What do you think that was about? Were they in their own struggle? Were they, just trying to take care of their own? What do you think? Why do you think that happened?
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. We had a company that, committed to making a website, and they quit in the middle of it. They just stopped, and they didn't really give a reason. They just, I guess,
Didn't follow through.
They didn't follow through, and maybe they were burned out. I'm not sure. I had a company that had 200 volunteers. Because one big part that we do at Black Business Enterprises is connect people with teaching them how to manage money. One of the biggest problems that businesses have is they don't know how to handle their personal finances. Therefore, it trickles down to their business finances. So it's very important for me to connect them with people that can teach them infancy of finances, how to build their credit, clean it up, figure out how to build their business credit, how to manage their books. So when we had those volunteers, it was so great. But then after 3 weeks actually starting, they were gone. And it was very disheartening because that was the number one thing. And this is an in-kind. We're not asking for cash. This is an in-kind time. Show us the real support. Let's really change. And that's how you really change a family structure. If someone knows how to use a dollar, you're changing their life. And that was, they gave up, and it was very disheartening. Like I said, I've seen all of this front and center. So it's very disheartening.
Terry, I want to get to you on this as well. Those early months after George Floyd was killed, we saw a lot of interest in supporting BIPOC businesses. Examples of what you saw early on and what happened 3 months or 6 months later.
Well, I will tell you what we got most often at Nexus was everybody and their grandmother who wanted diversity, equity, and inclusion training, right? And so we were fielding requests, right? Not only was it from the supplier vendor side, that Nancy and Alfredo had talked to, but certainly people were trying to think of what internally, internal biases type of work could their organizations or institutions embark on. And we did not have the capacity. But what we've done, much like what Nancy and Alfredo have also done too, is created a BIPOC consultant directory that we just referred people to, right? And so what we know is we needed to be able to not only we have to be able to respond, right? Plan for radical success and set up the entrepreneurs for success too. So we really saw that. The requests, of course, have trickled down over 3 months after, 6 months after. But for some of those folks, we hope they certainly got to the amazing consultants on our list, or to other folks who were helping them on that journey too. And that we hope that folks continue to do this work as well. I mean, I think some folks certainly still came back and wanted some more learning for those who were really committed to us when we really explained what it really takes to get this work done. Given our lens and our work at Nexus, we do it, but we do it in slightly different ways, focused on community engagement. Even our leadership work is. And so, because we know that's what this will also take too. And so there's also been talk of a lot of different nonprofit partners putting together a really huge list, right, of businesses that, and we have to remember it's not just the retail businesses, but we have a number of BIPOC people who do professional services as well that we really want to highlight too.
And I have a question from the audience. It's sort of related to some of the stories that Nancy has shared. Someone is asking, have any of you had to deal with companies that pledged to help people of color to you or your nonprofit and then backed out on you? Nancy talked about some folks disappearing. And if so, how did you navigate that? So Alfredo, was there anyone who came forward and said, we're going to do this, but then months or weeks later, like, you know what, we can't do that, or actually, we're not going to do that? Did that happen, Alfredo?
We don't let anyone get away with that nonsense.
Oh. All right now.
How about that?
Not today.
Not on our watch.
Mita doesn't play that. Okay.
No, not on our watch.
Wow.
I would say that if anything, what we have found very interesting is that I'll give you an example from a company called Cummins Engines. They manufacture large diesel engines, and they came to us and said, "Hey, we want to create a program, and we want to respond in some way, shape, or form." And they had an idea of what their program was going to be, and we said to them, "Listen, we know what we're doing. Let us help guide your positive intentionality with an actual impact result." And so we actually guided them on how to restructure their program with a mixture of grants and business loans, because a grant is a one-time action. It's a one-time transaction. A loan is recyclable, right? You can make those loans over and over and over. So we walked them through, hey, this is a great opportunity to respond, but also have a way to foment and fund recovery down the line, a year, 2, 3 down the road. So that's an example of an organization that came with a loosely formed idea of, we want to do something, and we helped them craft a program that was really effective, not just for the moment, right? Because everybody forgets the moment and then we go to our merry lives, but continue forward with in a longer term impact. And like that, we see now organizations that I'll give you an example. We've heard about Wells Fargo and the Open for Business program. Those loans are going to be in the system, in the economic system of the state of Minnesota for years to come. Huntington Bank just made another pledge for some significant investments. And so What we see now is that there is, at least from our perspective, and we are CDFI with technical assistance, lending and grants, and market. So our wraparound systems has seen a response phase that's slowing down for sure, but now there's recovery. Now folks are starting to see, how do we institutionalize these intentions in a way that's operationally feasible? All these corporations are for-profit endeavors. Let's not forget that. Everybody needs to make money, right? So they're all for-profit organizations, but they're really looking to, how do we operationalize these intentions and these new practices in a way that have a lasting effect? And that is the discussion that we find ourselves often. So that gives us optimism that that things are moving into the next phase of recovery.
And Terry, has anyone just outright just backed out on you, who said like, oh, we want to do this training, or we want to, provide this? Have you seen just an outright just like turnaround?
I mean, what we're very honest about too, particularly if you want to, the work we're doing at Nexus around deep community engagement, is we tell you the truth about what it will really take, and that it may lead to some tough conversations, uncomfortable conversations, and to the real work, right? To transformational work, not just transactional work. And so in that case, when people say no, they're not ready, we say that's fine. Come back when you are, because I think that's what we want. Similar, I like Alfredo's point about, not letting folks get away with that. For us, it's also saying you all need to be ready, right? This work is not, for the faint of heart. It is hard. We're going to be asking tough questions. And so, especially as you're thinking about, and then thinking, and then how do you start? What we call our work is really about operationalizing racial equity.
Yeah.
Nancy, I want to ask you something. Alfredo mentioned Target Corporation, Target, a major employer here in the Twin Cities, major business. We know that Target pledged to spend more than $2 billion with Black-owned businesses by the end of 2025. The company also promised to work with small Black-owned businesses to help them scale up to produce their products for a mass market. And so what's your understanding of how that is working so far? What are you hearing?
Well, I actually have businesses in Black business enterprises right now going through it, but what they're finding is that Target needs them to have $200,000 to $250,000 in liquid, which immediately stops the process, right? Because again, funding for Black-owned businesses. So although they might be so close to the finish line, that amount immediately kind of ends the deal. But I do see them trying, and they have been supportive. I do think that there needs to be a bit of a change when it comes to the funding piece, or something where they're at least given an order letter where the supplier may want to be able to extend a net 30 or extend funds to the Black-owned business so that they can get their products, but they don't have $250,000 in liquid assets to be able to get in those stores, and that's 90% of them.
Well, they might, because we might be able to help them with that. We, as a community development financial institution, that's what we do.
What you do.
And I would say that part of our Ascend Twin Cities program is precisely focusing on what are the requirements of large corporations to assimilate Black and Brown owned businesses into their supply chain. Let me just say this. There are thousands of supply chain leaders in this country banging their head against brick walls because they can't move their numbers and make their numbers better. So when we go and we meet with them, say, what are the obstacles to what you actually want to see in your supply chain? We start to evaluate their RFPs, for example, their requirements, to Nancy's point. Well, you got to have $250,000 in liquidity. Our first question is, why? Like, why? Or perhaps there's a legal document that's required. And what we find out is that there's often all of these requirements in a contract discussion that you go back, and when you start to question them, those are the very same requirements that are preventing the success in diversifying the supply chain. I joke, it's a maybe a business joke, but it's like something happened in 1997 and someone stuck a clause in a contract to protect the organization. And that clause has been sitting there for 20 years and nobody's revised it. And so that little clause vetoes an improvement in supply chain diversity. So we go back and we look at these contracts and go, do you need this clause? Do you really need this requirement? Like,
Might be
what
outdated.
what are you protecting against, right? Because if you're seeking diversity and diversifying your supply chain, which is strategically smart to do, and it's good business practice, there's a couple of clauses in your contract that are actually preventing you from doing it. So those are the conversations that are had with the corporations. When it comes to the clients and the BIPOC business owners, our work is to coach them and give them technical assistance to scale them up to that level of a conversation, so that when the only discussion then is capital and access to capital, we as a community development financial institution are ready to invest on this sales forecast. To Nancy's point, hey, I have a letter of commitment from Target, Best Buy, Cargill, you name them, for $500,000 in products and services. No pun intended. We'll take that to our bank. We'll bank on that, right? So there's some processes that when we look at them have been institutionalized, and we've often forgotten why are all these set up, why are these requirements set up this way? And I think that, to some of our partners like Target and Best Buy and others, they're starting to look at that. They're starting to look at, like, why are we having these quote unquote speed bumps in our process? So anyway, Nancy, this is not the moment, but hey, give us a call.
Let's meet.
I want to say too.
Okay. Yes, Terry, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are the same issues that I think nonprofits, particularly BIPOC nonprofits who employ a lot of BIPOC folks, experience too anytime they get state contracts, right? They are not, the state will pay after the fact. They don't have enough cash flow to bill for those hours, yep. And so it's the same problem. And I think Alfredo's point about criteria. You either need to get people at the table who represent these communities, or you need to embark on a DEI journey to realize who is missing, who is burdened, who benefits. When you put this archaic criteria in place, like sometimes, is it an insurance issue? And just like some rules, those rules can absolutely be taken out. So I think that's what we are, when I train leaders, we always push to talk about what is that criteria, and criteria is subjective and can always be shifted.
I'm wondering about success stories. Do any of you have any stories of some of the smaller BIPOC-owned businesses actually breaking into some of the larger retail stores in the last year and a half? And could these be models, Nancy?
Yes, there's a couple. I mean, not as many as I would like. Well, there's one deal that they're working on it. They're so close, which is Code White Teeth Whitening, first Black-owned teeth whitening kit, electronic toothbrush, etc. We do have some hair care products in Walmart. Really, really great success stories. But sometimes what I'm seeing, and again, Alfredo and I are going to be best friends, is that even then still, while being in those stores, just maintaining that level of success and staying in the stores. The biggest success story, I think, is Vanless Lemonade. He is in almost 20, 30 Hy-Vee stores, and he continues to scale up because someone gave him a chance and said, yes, I am going to give you this much money to scale your business. And he did just that and tripled his business. And that's what happens when you allow BIPOCs to be great. That's what happens.
Success stories you can share with us, Alfredo?
Oh, we have lots. Well, I mentioned Rick Harris and Ideal Commercial Solutions. They're literally the furniture company that's helping reset the Target headquarters. We also have, recently Conrad Nguyen bought Cortec. So he's a former 3M employee who bought a company that provided services to 3M. So now he's actually created an acquisition. We have a client named Lucinda Davila. She's from Puerto Rico, so close to my heart. She is getting a vendor number from Target for a product line of educational children's quasi toys. It's not toys, but it's really educational toys for kids in a Spanish immersive strategy. So those are some examples of some successes that we have. We have also Gloria Freeman, who owns Olu's Home, and she's actually expanding her assisted living operation. So in this recovery phase, as I was talking about, we have some folks that are capitalizing on opportunities so that they can retool their businesses for the new normal, the new economy going forward.
All right, I want to bring in a question from one of our audience members. Mary writes, I would like to find professional services from BIPOC professionals, for example, an attorney to do a will, but I worry that I might be in the way as a white person, taking up that professional's time that they could instead use to provide services to other BIPOC folks. Is that a valid concern? Are there limited BIPOC professionals available to serve the BIPOC community? So Mary, I guess, is wondering, like, in searching for BIPOC professionals to work with, should they really
I want to jump into this one because I have a friend that went through this. You know what? If you're looking for services and you want a BIPOC service provider, call them. You know what? Let them tell you they're too busy.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yes.
Let them tell you they don't have capacity for you. So I totally welcome this and I really appreciate the intent. But I have a very good friend who's a leadership coach and a organizational development expert. And when George Floyd happened, and she's an African American and whatever, her inbox exploded. Everybody needed her advice. And she had to go online and say, stop asking me for my advice. Hire me. Stop asking me for my right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Stop
Consulting
asking me
fee.
for my free advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead and hire
me.
me. Right.
Mm.
And so exactly. And so this, Mary, I totally applaud your effort, your concern. Let the BIPOC service provider tell you, I'd love to work with you, but my dance card is full. That's how we make sure that our BIPOC service providers and products and everything, they have excess demand. That's the dream. So go at it.
What do you
I
think,
would-
Terry?
I also
Yeah.
think too, like, and if they don't have the ability to serve you right now, they usually might know another BIPOC service provider who will, right? We have bar associations. There's a Hmong bar association, right? There are a number of other accounting organizations, audit firms that folks are using too for these tax services, right? My uncle's been doing taxes for like 20 some years. And so if they don't know, they know people in their networks because
Great point. Yep.
Mhm.
That's a
and
great
so
point.
so they are more than happy to refer folks too. So it doesn't end there. But I do think and there's plenty of work to go around, plenty of people too to do the work.
Mhm. Yeah.
Nancy, what can you add to that?
Mary, I will send you a whole list. And again, I also appreciate the intent. However, and that's, I think, one big thing that we need to break, because you're not the first person. I've had many white friends say, well, I don't want to take away from the community. Well, we don't want to just serve Black-owned businesses and BIPOC, customers. We want to
Customers.
be able to serve everyone. That's how small businesses grow, by expanding their audience. And you can't do that if that audience is even afraid to approach you. So we need to really break that, because we can serve everyone too. We can serve all audiences too. So thank you, Mary. Make that leap. I'll send you information if you need it. And starting January 1st, we're going to have over 73,000 businesses in our directory, which launches in a few days.
And
That's
I would say to Mary that not only hiring that service provider, but once that service has been executed, the best thing you can do is tell others.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then that powerful referral really is valuable. Is the best advertising a BIPOC entrepreneur can get.
This brings up a good point. A question I have on my list of questions. A big challenge for many small businesses is simply getting the word out that they exist. So what's being done to identify these BIPOC-owned companies and to help connect them with corporations and organizations who might want to buy their products or services? Terry?
I mean, I mentioned earlier too, and we're in this space too, where a lot of people, they trust Nexus, they trust the work we do. So we curate. So that's why we created this professional BIPOC consultant directory list that's on our website. I think that's, first it's finding the list. And part of it too is it's not we're not going to Yelp it, right? Yelp has its own functions for that, but
That's
Yelp
better.
also, yeah. And so, which is fine, but certainly creating lists and having first is access, right? Finding out where people are at, and then from there, do the research. But a lot of times, BIPOC folks, when we offered it, people signed up, and we have heard from the consultants on that list that they've been able to find work. So it's working for some folks.
Nancy, how are these businesses getting the word out that they exist?
I'm doing everything and anything on earth. So first thing is, of course, the groups. I started an innocent Facebook group and they grew to 3.6 million people. We're in every single state. Although Facebook just did shut down our Minnesota group the day before Thanksgiving. We'll talk about that next time. And the next thing is we have a Black business podcast where I invite small Black-owned businesses in the community so they can just talk about their business. And the next thing is the directory, which took us a while because we really wanted to vet people, and we created hundreds of websites for them. So we did not want to launch this unless they had everything from A to Z to present themselves in the best way possible. And then I am galvanizing the entire group. We use the group to make calls to corporations and to stores to request that small business be in the store. So I'm just using the people, because since we don't have the resources or the funds, I'm using the voice of the people to get the word out there. And the Black Business Ball, which gives small Black-owned businesses awards and small grants. And we started our own magazine. So
Nice.
we bought a mail route, so the magazine goes to over 20,000 homes. And this is the way that we are supporting.
I would want to just add
Alfredo, yes.
a brief comment there, because getting exposure to corporate contracts or large scale contracts is super important. But one thing that we know from our 50 years of experience is that the large corporate contract for a small BIPOC entrepreneur cannot be the Hail Mary save my business. I know this might be a little bit unpopular to hear, but we cannot and we do not treat our clients to, well, we're going to get you in front of Best Buy and they're going to give you, a contract to make, 50 million widgets and voila, your business is saved. Let's remember this: to scale up to those types of contracts, you have to have sound foundational business operations. You cannot think that a large scale contract is your problem solver if you're not conducting good payroll practices, or you're not conducting proper pricing practices, if your operations are sketchy, or if you're not making money. We have to, and this is what we do with our wraparound services and our consultancy. Our business consultants get in your P&L, they get into your operation, and they go, listen, you're a prime candidate to what Terry was talking about. A large corporation is going to give you a contract with 130 days net payable, and they're going to bankrupt you because you don't have the cash flow to do it, right? So I know I sound a little hard-nosed business geek right now, but that's very important, that the foundational of our BIPOC entrepreneurs are solid when we go whale hunting, quote unquote, right? So I just wanted to make that point, that that's part of what we do. Is that we have to make sure that whatever client we put in front of those large scale opportunities, which we want them to be transformational, we want them to be disruptive, and we challenge ourselves internally to make them so, that they don't fail. Because the minute one of these clients fails, guess what happens? The contract gets another clause that says, wait, now we got to have another risk mitigating tactic because we didn't set them up for success. So it's very important for us when we present clients that we can stand by that contract, that they're going to deliver and deliver excellently.
I want to bring in another question from a member of the audience. And this one is a question that's really getting at wholesale change. Can we attribute the decline in searches for BIPOC businesses since the initial surge after George Floyd's murder to positive changes in behaviors? Maybe folks have now made supporting BIPOC-owned businesses a part of the way they always live. So how do we gauge? How do we know that, things are we've seen this consistency, or, that we've had this drop of support? Like, how do you measure it? Nancy?
I mean, it's not really a metric that can be measured, to be honest, but I'm sure there's many factors, and of course, the same businesses we're looking for support from, they also went through COVID, like the rest of the world. So, we have to also be understanding to know that they also, face their own challenges. But like my good friend Alfredo said, a lot of those corporations got bailed out, uh, like that. So I really can't say with this one, but I don't also want to use excuses to try and cover up, what promises made but not delivered. Where there's many variables, but it's not always the cash, it's the in kind. And I know there's a question here from the audience that I can't read, but is the in kind support, is the educational. Let's let the youth, we have youth BBE. Let's let them shadow at these corporations so they can learn some skills and change their families. That I don't know, Alfredo, what do you think?
Well,
We task ourselves with a couple of things. I think that one, wealth equality and racial equality metrics, where currently the state of Minnesota is, if not rock bottom, at the bottom of the heap, we are looking at those metrics and we're saying, on our watch, this has to change. And towards that, we're going from, I think I said, we went from 21 to $65 million loan fund. Our aspiration is that starting first quarter of next year, we're going to build a $200 million loan fund. We're not playing, we're going. We're going to expand our capacity for consultancy to the thousands, leveraging digital technology. And we want to create $400 million BIPOC-owned businesses that have corporate contracts. We want to make 50 multi-million-dollar BIPOC businesses that have corporate contracts. So we've set ourselves up in our strategic path to some disruptive, bold goals, because we have to scale our solutions to the size of the problem. So if those metrics where we're right now at the bottom of the country, we're watching those. We're also watching how our client cohort performs in terms of top line growth and bottom line growth and the overall economy. This is a metric that I talk about all the time. If the economy of the United States of America grows 4% and our clients all grow 4%, you know what we just did? We perpetuated the problem for one more year. Congratulations, we did nothing. So with the economy's growing 4, we want our clients to be growing 8, 10, 12. We have to outpace the mainstream economy. That's what we're trying to task ourselves. And that's how we think about our services and our deployment of our services.
I also think there's nothing, sorry, go ahead, Angel.
No, I was going to ask your thoughts. Like, how do we gauge success in this?
I think there's also too, there's nothing stopping the corporations themselves from, stating where their investments are, and in fact, this is one of the few times where they might actually model from, the federal government. There's always been DBE, disadvantaged business enterprise, and MBEs, minority business enterprises, that have been requirements of government contracts. And this is maybe one of the few times the private sector could follow and talk about where all their investments are going, as well as other sectors, right? There's also things communities can do to create report cards and accountability metrics that, similar to what Alfredo was stating about how where MEDA is evaluating, communities could evaluate too. And so there's nothing stopping us from creating these tools or the corporations themselves. And so I think, metrics are, we measure what we value. And so I think that's going to be really important for us moving forward.
I have another question to pass on from the audience. This is a question about business education. Nancy talked about the desire for BIPOC businesses to learn skills about managing money. Can the panelists talk more about what specific support or education that BIPOC businesses are looking for? I work with a local chamber of commerce, and I think we could do more for BIPOC business advocacy. You talked about managing money, teach a person how to manage their money, and then that's a gift for life. Nancy, would you want to say anything?
You know, Angela, it sounds so difficult, but it really isn't. If you notice, they're not teaching financial literacy in school. They're not teaching you how to file your taxes, and they're not teaching you how to manage your checkbook. And especially in our community, it is literally what keeps a lot of people behind because they might get a really good job, but they still don't know how to manage their finances. What we've done is simply, take people in the community that know about it and teach them. And we see these families completely come out of poverty. We actually are measuring this within Black business enterprises, where we had over just this month, over 20 families not have to take any type of assistance and actually get out of vouchers and completely live on their own. And it is such a proud moment for them. So when we're talking about, the chambers offering maybe some educational resources, yes, let's have workshops once a month, every month, and target those people that really want to make a difference for themselves. Financial literacy, we talk about it so much, but how do we really practice that? How do we really instill that in the community, which is taking up, I focus on the tiny ponds before I go to the ocean. So that's what I do. I take people individually and simply teach them, whether it is balancing their checkbooks, figuring out their credit, build business credit. Like Alfredo says, they're using their own money, but they don't know how to leverage other resources so that they can use their business to build a platform. And that is what we need. From the person that asked the question, that is what we need, and that's what we're looking for these corporations. If you can't give in cash, give in kind.
Right.
Let's focus on show us how to do this, or do we want to just keep BIPOC people in debt forever and continue the cycle? Because it's the
Yeah.
question I have to ask.
I would add that to that there's something that we've built. It's about to go live also. It's the Volunteer Accelerator Network. And we know that many corporations, banks, and other financial institutions can give capital in the form of resources, financial resources. But if anything, corporate America and let's just call it business America can solve this problem because we follow the forces of the market. We're not politicized. And in our current politics, it's so polarized right now that it's very hard to get anything done. In corporate America and in business America, and in economic America, we follow the market. We're a country that is about capitalism, and capitalism is moving right now in directions that are very much so opportunistic to address these problems. And so for me, one of the things that we want to capture is this, to Nancy's point, the human capital. How many subject matter experts in marketing, law, accounting, finance, strategy, pricing, human resources are sitting in the towers of downtown Minneapolis? Well, we'll be sitting back in the towers of downtown Minneapolis when we'll come back to office. That knowledge base from that community, connecting all that know-how to our client community is extremely powerful, because it's one thing to be very, I talk about many of our clients have to make this shift, this journey from being an employee mindset to be the employer mindset. When you're the boss and it's your business, your scope of skills and capabilities needs to grow rapidly, because now you're deciding what contracts to go after. You're deciding pricing. You're deciding how many people you're going to staff in the restaurant at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. So it's a completely different set of skills, which is what we do in terms of shifting folks from, okay, you're an employee of this company, now you're going to own your own business. And in many cases, we also do mergers and acquisitions where it's like, you were an employee of this company, now you bought the company. Now you are the boss of the company. So those are many different sets of skills that in our practice, we address and make sure that our clients have support in growing and developing.
And I just want to be clear, Mita, you're in the process right now of developing this network of volunteers, many of whom
Yep.
who work for these larger companies to work with small businesses on things like contracts. And
We
so
currently have 50 volunteers beta testing the platform. It's all digital. So we're
Mhm.
leveraging this technology that we're all in here today. And our curriculum is going to be online. So we'll be able to track the needs of a client, match them with a volunteer that has that subject matter expertise, and then progress through a skills development curriculum engagement. We call it a consulting engagement, so that at the end of a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever they needed, they got. And then we can move to the next topic or the next area of development.
One last quick point I want to add about the technical skills too. I think, like, I mean, Nancy talked correctly about financial literacy, but, sometimes it's really, you can't always tell people who don't sometimes have a lot of resources that they don't know how to manage their money, because sometimes they know how to manage it really well, actually. And so, so I really think we should think about how we frame it as, and Alfredo has spoken to this too, about setting folks up for success, right? And so what are their futures? What are their hopes and dreams for their families? Because they started the businesses because there were folks like my folks or other immigrant refugee communities. There were no other choices. They couldn't invest 4 years in a college education because their families needed a roof over their head and food in their bellies today. So I think that's, again, when we reframe it from the piece of how we really think about, ensuring success for you, for generations, there is nobody who says they don't want to see that or partake in that.
Right.
Final question from the audience before we're out of time. Someone writes, Indigenous business owners, it seems like the letter I in BIPOC could stand for invisible, as much as Indigenous communities don't receive the attention and support they need. What corporate or other support exists for Indigenous entrepreneurs, whether for-profit or nonprofit, and what efforts are being made to connect them, especially for rural reservation communities?
I am super excited about that question, because I was last week, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago, I was at the Minnesota American Indian Chamber of Commerce annual dinner. And they are developing a really cool GPO platform, group purchasing organization. So they're taking Indian Nation and they're collaborating to create a purchasing power. It's called Gather 2.0. And I hope this is not confidential, because they did it at the annual meeting. So I think that I can talk about this. I got super excited and I wanted to talk to Joanne White Rabbit, because I said, not only is this a great opportunity to create purchasing power, but if you flip the model and invert it, it creates an incredible digital platform to showcase Indigenous businesses to corporate America. So rather than just deciding how you're going to spend your money, let's turn it around and let's figure out how we help corporate America buy from Indian country and put money into Indian country. So for me, I love that question, because I walked out of that dinner like, I start writing stuff on napkins, and then I come back to the office and people tell me I'm crazy. But there's definitely no invisibility. I think that is an incredible amount of innovation and really good strategic thinking going on. And we're very excited to be part of that. So anyway, I'll shut up, because that question was like right into what we're trying to do some work, and we're doing work with some tribes in state and in California. So we're very excited about the work opportunities with Indigenous clients.
So my last question before we're out of time here is just all three of you. I mean, what is the benefit of having these BIPOC businesses not just survive, but thrive? How do we as a community as a whole, how do we benefit from a conversation about like, wow, BIPOC businesses are doing great? Nancy?
I know that the world hates for BIPOC businesses, and I have to say it like this to have equity, but it lowers crimes. It makes people's lives better. It makes our country stronger. When we're talking about going to the moon and competing with Russia and other countries, it's like, how can we call America the greatest country on earth if we are not supporting everyone, BIPOC included? It builds communities, it makes families better, and helps people thrive to build a better country, and that's a fact.
Terry, how do we all benefit from BIPOC businesses, not just surviving but thriving? What's the benefit to the whole state?
I mean, I think, we look at, like there actually, I remember a report up there, it was before your time at META, that said like if businesses hired one more BIPOC person, it would close the unemployment gap. Of course, this was a couple years ago. Now, with unemployment rates higher, so we're looking at that, what it means in terms of sales tax revenue, what it could mean to help then pay for city services could be tremendous. What it would mean for for our economy in terms of revitalizing our economy when people have access to additional funds. What it would mean for families to begin to save and for future generations to be able to pay for things and help offset costs that a lot of families disproportionately are paying for, expenses they're paying for too. It has a tremendous impact. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the work Nexus is doing that's growing worker owners, and that this is really, and the growth of cooperatives, because we all know I myself might not be able to buy into this business, but maybe a group of us can, particularly if it's a business that we've worked at. So we're really embarking on these new models of how we operate in these spaces too, in the Twin Cities here.
And Alfredo, in our last minute, the benefit to our entire community across the state if these businesses are thriving.
All boats rise. That is a proven model that all boats rise. And if anything, we know that in the United States of America, our current situation with racial wealth inequality is costing us anywhere between 4 and 6% in gross domestic product. You want to compete with China and you want to remain a viable global superpower in the economy of the world, fix the issues right at home. We fix ourselves in the United States of America, we have immense potential for growth. So you can do it for the right reasons. You could do it for the reasons of the heart. You can do it for the reasons of history. You can do it for reasons of economy and mathematics. For all those reasons, this issue needs resolution. And the moment is now. I'll end with that.
All right, we will end with that. Our time is up for now. I want to thank our audience for staying with us for the past hour as we've talked about economic inclusion and BIPOC-owned businesses. I want to thank our guest again, Nancy Corsa, who is the founder and CEO of Minneapolis-based Black Business Enterprises. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you to Alfredo Martel, the president and CEO of Metropolitan Economic Development Association, known as META, and to Terry Tao, who's the program director at Nexus Community Partners. A reminder, you can listen to this conversation, a recording of it on the radio on NPR tomorrow morning at 9. That's the regular time slot of my talk show. You'll also be able to find a recording of today's virtual event on our website, which is nprnews.org. And our next In Focus virtual event will be taking place on February 23rd. We're partnering with organizations that are part of the LGBTQ community on that event. But that's it for us today. Thank you again for your time. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everybody.